be something that will be completely new for most of you. Now, for most of you, you think the Catholic Church is just one. You know, because all you know, for the most part, is the Roman Catholic Church. And now think about a church which, first of all, has married priests. I happen to be a celibate priest, but most Byzantine Catholic priests are married and have families. And think of a church that sings everything but uses no musical instruments. And, you know, so those are just a couple of things that would be different. But the first thing that you'll see that's different if you come to St. Athanasius, St. Athanasius is a rather unusual setup because, and it's St. Athanasius the Great because on our calendar we have several St. Athanasiuses. So, because St. Athanasius the Great was Patriarch of Alexandria, and he is the pillar of orthodoxy, and he lived in the 4th century. And every Protestant fundamentalist that I meet criticizes the Catholic Church. I says, without St. Athanasius the Great, you wouldn't know what the New Testament is. Because the list of New Testament works that we use, he developed. He's the one who wrote the list down that we use, the 27 books of the New Testament we use, in an Easter letter to his bishops, telling them what was allowed to be read in church and what was not. So, St. Athanasius the Great church building was the former Assumption Roman Catholic Church for 100 years. And it is on the second highest point in Marion County. And so one of our famous claims to fame for our building is that if you look at a picture of the 1913 flood of the White River, and you look at the West Indianapolis part, which in this greater Indianapolis area was the most seriously flooded part of the city in 1913 and 1916 as well, and also in 1936. You will see an island with the St. Athanasius Church with its almost 100-foot high steeple, the rectory, what was then a playground, and the school as an island surrounded by water that went on for miles. So probably if you're talking to your great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents or know anything of your family's history, you might have heard of the flood of 1913 if there were anywhere in southern Ohio or in southern Indiana. My mother's family originally comes from Washington, Indiana. And so I grew up calling Washington, Indiana down home. Never went there until I was transferred here 3 years ago. So I have that Hoosier connection. And one of the earliest stories I remember was my grandmother telling us the story of the Great Flood of 1913. Why? Because her father was the water commissioner in Washington, Indiana. And where was their house? Next to the White River. And so they had to, my grandmother had rubella, as did several of her siblings. So before they could be evacuated as the water got higher and higher and higher, they had to find a crew of men who were willing to do it, all of whom had German measles. And a house that was already quarantined for German measles. So that's my big connection, even with the flood of 1913. If you were to come and look at the outside of our church, you wouldn't even imagine it was a Catholic church, but it was built as a Catholic church. But it's built to look like a Protestant church on purpose. You know, a late 19th century neo-Gothic Protestant church. Why? Because it was the third attempt to build a Catholic church in Indianapolis, and it was the first one to succeed in not getting shut down. Indianapolis was a center of anti-Catholic hatred in the Indianapolis area. So that's a little bit of background about our particular parish and our building. We've been there 20 years. The parish is 35 years old, and we've been founded in 1980. All of the divine services are in English, so no one asks me that question. That's good. What language do you serve the liturgy in? It says in English, as we've been serving the liturgy since 1881. Because that's the first English divine liturgy served in the United States.
Prior to that, was that Greek or Latin?
We didn't use Greek or Latin. We used Church Slavonic, which is the root language for Russian, Ukrainian, Slovak, all of those Slavic languages. Church Slavonic is the root language for all. Now, before that, in the 9th century, we used Greek. But we use whatever's the local language.
Gotcha.
So that's why we've been using English for so many years. So if you come, you might hear a little bit of Slavonic and a little bit of Greek, and a little bit of some in Spanish at various times of the year, but the service was primarily in English. Now, the Catholic Church is a communion of 24 self-governing churches, or autonomous churches, or the Latin word that they use is sui juris ecclesia. 24. The most recent one was just established earlier in 1915, and that is the Church of Eritrea. And they're supposed to be internally self-governing, and yet they're all in communion with one another. The Roman Church is one of those 24 churches. I like to put it, they're the McDonald's. Comparatively, we're the Burger King, even though we're much smaller. There's throughout the world, there are probably approximately 6 or 7 million Byzantine Catholics. The other 7 billion Eastern Catholics of various other churches are Syro-Malabar, Syro-Malankar, Ethiopian, Eritrean, as I mentioned earlier, Coptic, Armenian, Chaldean, Syriac, Armenian, and in the Byzantine churches were divided up by national jurisdictions. And if that's not confusing enough, the United States is even more confusing. Because in the United States, we have 4 different Byzantine autonomous churches represented. Mine is the Byzantine, we call ourselves the Byzantine Catholic Church in America, or the Byzantine Metropolitan Church of Pittsburgh. We are the only Catholic church headquartered in the Western Hemisphere. The head of my church is the Metropolitan Archbishop of Pittsburgh, William Spurlock. He is in communion with the Pope of Rome. Okay, but he's the head of my church. And he grew up in Duluth, Minnesota. So he was at one point my parishioner when I served in Minnesota. But he's the head of the church. Also in this country, the largest Byzantine Catholic church is also represented, and that is the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Greek Catholic and Byzantine Catholic are interchangeable terms. And their metropolitan is in Philadelphia, but their church is not internally self-governing here in the United States. The Metropolitan of Philadelphia is part of the Patriarchal Synod in Ukraine, and the church therefore is headquartered in Kiev, Ukraine. Then the third largest of the four, is the Melkite Greek Catholic Church, and that is comes from the Middle East, and the people were originally of Arabic origin. And their bishop here, they have a bishop and one eparchy that covers the whole country. And their bishop, Bishop Nicholas Samra, is subject to His Holiness, the Patriarch of Antioch, and of all the East, of Alexandria and Jerusalem, Gregory III Laham, the 13th apostle, the successor of St. Peter. And yes, they use all those titles. And then the fourth one is the Romanian Greek Catholic Church.
You're here.
Here, here. And that, here in the United States, they are represented by the Eparchy of St. George in Canton, Ohio. And of course, my parishioners are part of that. In my particular parish, we have people who represent all four of the Byzantine Catholic churches in the United States. So although we are a parish of the Eparchy of Parma, not all of my parishioners are canonically, under church law, part of our particular church. So that means when I get to marry people, then I have to make sure which church they belong to so that I ask permission from the right place. But everyone is welcome in our church. So this gives you an idea just about the Byzantine churches. There are other smaller Byzantine Catholic churches. There is the church, the Greek Catholic Church of the former Yugoslavia. That's a big fancy word, but that is the former Yugoslavia, in Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Montenegro, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Macedonia, each of which have Greek Catholic churches. And they have several bishops, and bishops actually now in each of those nation states, but they haven't quite figured out how to organize them all together. There is in Italy the Greek Catholic Church of Italy, which is made up of Italians of Greek and Albanian descent. And they are primarily in southern Italy and in Sicily. And a good friend of mine has been recently, this past summer, named bishop of the Eparchy of Pania del Albanese, which is outside of Palermo in Sicily. So Bishop George is now there. And so that's, so even in Italy, we have Byzantine Catholic churches that are native to Italy. But the Byzantine Catholic churches have spread all over the world. According to whatever various jurisdictions we may belong to, we have people all over the world. And so even in Italy, there are multiple jurisdictions because of all of the movement post-1990. We have Greek Catholic people all over Western Europe, and in significant numbers. So there are bishops serving in Italy. I have a friend of mine who for years was the exarch for the Ukrainian Byzantine Catholics in Italy, and we always chided him as Rite, Bishop of Rome. That was not his title, but his name is Rite. He is now bishop in England. And so in England and in France and in Germany and in the Benelux nations, each of them have Greek Catholic bishops serving them. Then if you go to South America, we're all over South America now, and even in parts of Central America. And of course Canada has as many Byzantine Catholics and Greek Catholics as we have in the United States. So they're an even bigger influence in the Canadian church than we are here in the United States. So we've got these various churches, all that are part of the Byzantine Catholic or Greek Catholic churches. Now, like I said, those terms are interchangeable. Another term that we frequently use for ourselves is Orthodox Christians in communion with Rome. That upsets the Orthodox, and it upsets traditional Roman Catholics, and it upsets Byzantine Catholics, Greek Catholics who are too Latinized to know who they really are. So, but it's a good way to really describe our situation, because as far as Byzantine Catholics are concerned, we hold to the first 7 ecumenical councils, and like the Eastern Orthodox churches, of having a special prominence in our church. Our liturgy, our theology, our canon law tradition, all comes from what the Orthodox Church has. And in fact, after the schism between East and West, we stay with the Catholic Church in the East. The Roman Church went off on her own. Okay? Now I say that on purpose, I know, because people don't oftentimes understand that we returned to communion with Rome. We have never thought of ourselves as being outside the Catholic Church. We have always been the Catholic Church. Rome has not always been in communion with us, or us with them. Now, a little bit about our liturgy. If you ever come to a Byzantine liturgy, on a typical Sunday, you just come for the Divine Liturgy itself. Plan to stay for an hour and a half. We don't think that's long. Because I like to put it this way. Liturgy is eternal. And we are practicing now for eternity. And so what goes on in heaven? When we listen to, in the book of Revelation chapter 4, there's a description that in most of our Bibles will have the heading, the Heavenly Liturgy. And when I read that to my parishioners, I ask them to close their eyes. As I read this to them, they'll say, wow, that's just like when the bishop comes. Because we have the bishop, who is the one seated upon the throne, he is Christ in the church, surrounded by his presbyters, and celebrating around the altar, and the angels and the saints and the martyrs from underneath the altar even are talking about singing, "Holy, holy, holy Lord God Almighty, heaven and earth are filled with your glory," which is from Isaiah. And that's liturgy. So our liturgy is not in a rush, even though I'm fairly fast when I sing. But it's really not rushed. And so if you're coming there and you're expecting to get out in 45 minutes, you'll be very disappointed. If you come planning to stay to worship the Lord, you'll find a worship experience like no other. Our temple, which is what we call our church building, is literally heaven on earth for us. And so it is divided up as the scriptures tell us the Old Testament temple and the New Testament temple is to be divided. So you'll come and you'll see there's an outer porch, there's the inner porch or vestibule, there's the holy place where the people stand, and beyond the icon screen, you will see the Holy of Holies. And there's a description, and please feel free to pick these up. It's not my church, but you can see that the Byzantine church's interior is quite a bit different from a typical Roman Catholic church. So the Divine Liturgy is primarily celebrated within the altar or behind an icon screen. The icon screen may vary from one church to another. From a solid screen like ours, but ours is only two-tiered, so a solid screen that goes all the way to the ceiling, which is what I use for people who come to church but don't want to come to adult enrichment. I said, well, fine. Tell me all the icons that are to appear on the icon screen, starting with the top, from floor to ceiling. So far, no one has passed. Some churches, the screen is more visible, and more you can see through it. But many churches also, like ours, has a curtain behind the center doors or the royal doors. And those doors open and close as the curtain opens and closes at various times during the Eucharistic liturgy and during the other liturgical services of the church. In fact, throughout most of the Eastern Catholic churches, there is a divider between the congregation and the altar area. All face east in our church. So you might say, well, your back is to the people. I said, no, my back is not to the people. We are all praying together, and we are all facing God. It's like the scriptures tell us. When the Son of Man returns on the last day, it will be like a lightning flash from the east to the west. So when we can, we build our churches facing east. Because of that. And it's a sign that we are waiting the second coming of Christ. So think about that for a moment. So I don't want to have my back to the Lord when he comes. So I and my people stand waiting with great expectation for the coming of our King. As I said earlier, the liturgy is sung. Except for the homily and the prayer before communion, everything should be sung. I've been in a couple of liturgies where the priest has dementia and he's saying the homily as well. That's, that was, one was actually the patriarch of the church, and that was the time that the bishops decided he needed to retire. When he got up into the pulpit and sang his homily. But that's what we do. We sing all of our divine services and no musical instruments. So we sing a cappella, everything. And depending on which variety of Byzantine Catholic Church you attend, our music is somewhat different from one jurisdiction, from one particular church to another. In Arab churches, they use their liturgy. Their music is all in a minor key. The Greek church is the same way. The Romanian church, their music is a little bit different. The Ukrainian church, the Russian church, and so on. The music that you'll typically hear at St. Athanasius is called Carpatho-Rusin plain chant, because the people who originally founded the parish, 5 families, that started it. That's where their ancestors came from. And so that's the music that they knew. And it's very simple. And I like, it's, the tongue-in-cheek, but it's like country music, it's hillbilly music. One of the things that my chant professor many years ago said, we don't know whether some of these hymns were first sung in the bar or in the church. I'll give you an example. And I'll sing it in English. Grant, O Lord, to your servants peace, health, salvation, and long life, for many happy and spiritually fruitful years. God grant them many years, God grant them many years, God grant them many blessed years. In health and happiness, in health and happiness, God grant them many blessed years. Now you tell me. We really don't know. But it could, could be one, it could be the other. I have an abbot once taught me that particular song in Church Slavonic with glug glug glugs with it. So it's like, think glug. But it's very beautiful. It is very beautiful, but in our case also very simple music that you'll pick up. If you ever come, you'll pick it up very easily. You know, I always tell people, if you first come to our church, don't pick up the book. First of all, it will confuse you. Secondly, we don't like our people getting that. But it will confuse you, and you'll miss the liturgy. Because you'll be busy looking at the book instead of watching everything that's going on. And in the Byzantine liturgy, every single sense is used. So, of course, we sing, our hearing, we use lots of incense, so smell is in there. Even like the oils that we use to anoint, we oftentimes will mix them with rose oil or orange blossom oil or lemon oil. So even the olive oil that we use to anoint people oftentimes has a very beautiful smell to it. The Eucharistic bread that we use is leavened bread. And it looks like, the smaller buns look like a dinner bun. The Greek style loaf is a large round loaf. And so when we give out communion, which we give to infants, toddlers, small children, children, adolescents, adults, we start giving out communion at baptism, which is also when we confirm the children or chrismate them, as we would say. So that happens all at the same time. So whether you're an adult or whether you're a child, you are received into the church through baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist all together. So we use a spoon in our particular church. Ukrainians and the Greeks and the Russians use a spoon to give communion. And the communion that we give is about crouton size. And the person comes up, tilts their head back, opens their mouth as wide as they can. The priest or deacon takes the communion, the Eucharist, and puts it into their mouth with the spoon. That you're not supposed to close your mouth on. And the kids do, but they're kids. So we also always give communion using both species. Commingled together. That's why we use the spoon. Because I will have taken the precious body and placed it into the precious blood and then deliver it on a spoon. I'm used to trains. I live with them within a block of me all the way around. So that's one of the things that you'll see that's quite different from what you're used to. So of course then your sense of taste is involved. And it's taste and see the goodness of the Lord in a very real way. Also, if you come to our divine services, don't be surprised if the priest that you see standing before you is married. I happen to be a celibate priest. But my successor, in all likelihood, will be a married priest. The Eparchy of Parma currently has 30 priests, 10 of whom are married, and of the priests that are under the age of 50, all but 2 are married. So I'm a dying breed as a celibate priest in our church. So our bishops are chosen from our celibate clergy, though. Or the priest can either be a celibate like myself or a widower, because that's where we pick the bishops from. It's very unusual outside of the former Soviet Union for the priest's wife to voluntarily go into a monastery so he could be consecrated a bishop. But during the During the Soviet era, it happened in the Moscow Patriarchate many, many times. So oftentimes, in fact, the one convent kept open throughout the communist era was the convent in which the wives of priests that the KGB, the government, had decided could become bishops were put. No, most of our convents are not like that. But that happens to be. And in that case, the Moscow Patriarchate is the largest of the Orthodox churches. So where there are about 300 million Eastern Orthodox Christians, there are about 7 million who are in communion with Rome. And that's what my church is. So we're one of those churches that is in communion with Rome. Now, what are some of the theological differences? Because some people say, well, your liturgy is different. That's all the difference. Well, no, that isn't all the difference. There are theological differences as well. Not on essentials, but certainly on emphasis. So, in the Roman Catholic Church, I'll ask you a question. I know the answer, but I'll ask you a question. In the Roman Catholic Church, who is the minister of marriage?
The couple.
The couple. That's correct. Now, that is only true in the Roman Catholic Church. In the rest of the Catholic Church, it's the priest. So only in the Roman Catholic Church do the couple marry each other as ministers, and the priest or deacon or some other designated person witnesses for the church. In our tradition, no priest, no marriage. Marriage is conferred by the priest calling down the Holy Spirit upon the couple. And usually he does that after he's placed crowns on their heads. So, and again, it's all very scriptural. And the crowns, by the way, are as old as the rings. That's a surprise to a lot of people. And also, people will say, because they'll say, well, are you married because you have a ring on your wedding hand? I says, well, I do have a ring on my wedding hand, but no, it's because I am an archimandrite, not because I'm a married man. Because the ring, the wedding hand in the Christian East is the right hand. Because this is where you receive blessings. This is how you bless yourself. If you as a priest or a deacon, when you come forward to communion, you place your hands like that to receive the Eucharist from the bishop. I give blessings with my right hand. And all these other things. In my left hand, well, in the left hand is, if you remember, in places where you don't have lots of water, never walk up to an Arab person, Christian or Muslim, and extend your left hand. You know what that means?
It's your dirty hand.
That's your dirty hand. This is stuff you do dirty stuff with. You eat with this hand. You receive blessings with this hand. You do clean things with this hand. You wipe your behind with this one. So that's why you would never put the wedding ring on this hand.
Why did you say?
Because of some fairy tale about the vein from the left hand going directly to her.
Like the Middle Ages.
Like in the Middle Ages. And it's a fairy tale. As is the father of the bride selling his daughter to her new owner. Which in this country is called giving the bride away. Huh?
It's like a sale.
It is a sale. There's no other word for it. That's why actually even in the Roman Catholic liturgy of marriage, it's not there. If you come into my church, it won't be done. I won't do it. argument with any bride's father. I have. Even sometimes when the bride was from my church and the father should know better. I says, no, you do not own her. You are not going to sell her. And people all think, oh, that's just silly. Listen to all of the words that are commonly used in North American society. It's barbaric. Only the Brits and North Americans do this barbarity. But listen to what we say. Well, who's going to give her away? Now, is her father going to give her away? Well, if her father's dead or the parents are divorced and they're not talking, what yet? Says, well, who gives her away? Now, what do you give away? You know, you give away property that you own. And why did it happen in medieval England? It was to make sure the bridal price got exchanged. And the only place that was trustworthy to make sure it was done was in the church in front of the whole community. And so, well into the 18th century, that's exactly what was done. Either they would pass the dowry from the bride would go to the groom, and the bridal price for the bride would be paid to the bride's father in the church in front of everyone. Okay? In the East, we don't do that. In fact, the ceremony for a wedding in our church begins in the vestibule, as do, by the way, all of our other mysteries or sacraments. They begin in the vestibule of the church. So at a wedding ceremony, I go to the vestibule of the church and I ask the couple a couple of questions, which is actually the Byzantine Empire civil ceremony. We had a line about the church, which was not originally there. We said, do you come here freely without reservation to take so-and-so here present to be your husband and wife, according to the mind of the church? And they say, I have, hopefully. And then the next question is, have you promised yourself to anyone else? Now that sometimes gets skipped, but I don't skip it. And hopefully the answer to that question is, no, I have not. Now, when we say that, in the Byzantine church there is a formal betrothal ceremony, a formal engagement ceremony. And if a person has gone through that, that has to be divided by the church as well. Before, if the marriage doesn't go through, then the couple is supposed to come before the priest and have the betrothal dissolved. And so I asked that question. And in the empire days, that was the civil ceremony. Everyone had to appear in front of the Orthodox priest, whether they were an Orthodox Christian or a Roman Catholic or Jewish or a Muslim or pagan. If they wanted their marriage recognized by the government, they had to come to the Orthodox Church and have that ceremony. And since we don't let unbaptized people theoretically into our church building, into the temple, it's done in the vestibule. So once I've got that accomplished, then I lead the couple with their parents and the rest of the wedding party behind them into the temple, into the church, for the celebration of the mystery of the crowning, which is the wedding ceremony. So there's no place for the father to sell his daughter to her new owner. Just no place. And they say, well, we want that picture of him taking her down the aisle. I says, well, then do it after we're done. Because American ideas of what is supposed to be in a traditional marriage ceremony have little to do with the theology or the reality of the sacrament. Okay. And usually if someone calls me on the phone to get married, they want to get married, and the first question out of their mouth is, how long is the aisle? I'm usually done there.
Why are they asking that?
Because they want to know how long the runner is supposed to be. I don't let them put runners down the aisle. Because I have to walk in backwards. I'm leaving them in like this. What's going to happen if I want the runner? This is a voice of experience. I've been a priest 30 years. I've had that happen, so I just think, don't let it down. And then the wedding ceremony, traditionally, there's no vows. Now, in some parishes, they do use them, and they're an option. But traditionally, there are no vows. Because in our wedding tradition, there is no until death do us part. Marriage has an eternal dimension to it. And so all the prayers end with, the Trinity, is one form or the other, now and ever and unto the ages of ages, or now and ever and forever, amen. Because there's always this eternal dimension. And so it has that great importance to it. We have, if I happen to have been a married priest, well, let's say my deacon, for example, is married, has 3 kids, and he'll be ordained to the priesthood probably in next year or so. But both he and his wife must be in their first marriage, because the first marriage has this eternal dimension to it. So they both have to be in their first marriage. Extremely rare exceptions. So extremely rare that it's not really worth mentioning other than just simply saying that. So both he and she are to be in their first marriage. If his wife passes away, he cannot remarry.
Once he's a priest.
Huh?
Once he's a priest.
Once he's a deacon. Once he's a deacon, he cannot remarry. And if subdeacon's wife passes away and he decides to remarry in the church, and he can remarry in the church in his case, but then he can't go any more than subdeacon. And that's that. Because the ideal is one marriage. That is eternal. And so the priest and the deacon have to represent that to the community. As I said earlier, marriage is conferred by the crowning of the couple and the priest calling down the Holy Spirit upon them. And so crowns of various kinds are used. Slavs, we like to use the big, that look like the emperor's crown. We love those. And that's what we typically use. But we also use, the Greeks have a tendency to use a coronet style. Another possible style is to have wreaths made of flowers or greenery and those will be placed on the heads of the couple. Oftentimes they're tied together with a ribbon. And they're given their baptismal candles, although probably not really their baptismal candles, but represents their baptismal candles. And they are shown off to the church by being taken around. There's a table in the center of the church. Our particular church leaves it there, other churches move it around. And you walk around it 3 times, showing them off to the world as a newly married couple. As the hymn, "O holy martyrs, you have suffered courageously and received your reward," is being sung. The same hymn used when the deacon or the priest or the bishop is led into the altar area and kisses the 4 corners of the holy table. Because we are all called to give witness. So we're all called to be martyrs, and so this reminds us of that. It's called the Dance of Isaiah, because the last hymn or troparia that is sung goes, "Rejoice, O Isaiah, the virgin is with child and bears a son." It is a reference back to the prophecy of Isaiah about the incarnation of Christ. And then usually after that, then you take the crowns off, give the couple communion, if they're both Catholic or Orthodox. And then usually it's a dismissal after that. It's not usually served in the Eucharistic liturgy. It can be, but it normally isn't. Because what do you think is the traditional day for marriage in the Byzantine church? Any wild guesses out there?
Friday.
Friday's forbidden, by the way, Sunday. Now, typically here in the States, we do it on Saturday because that's what people do in the States. But Sunday is the ideal. I've never convinced a couple in 30 years to have their wedding on Sunday. You know, but typically, traditionally, huh?
He's at the reception, so we're not gonna have it on
I think have a reception afterwards, Sunday afternoon. The hall's probably cheaper.
Sunday. Oh, come Monday.
But, well, I know, but see, then you have the liturgy in the morning, and then the wedding immediately follows the liturgy, and so you're having lunch at the reception.
Not in America.
I know, that's why I have not been able to convince anyone in 30 years. In Europe all the time, it's
Now, in the Roman Rite, you cannot get married unless Sunday.
that is correct.
Okay. I'm trying to remember the reason.
You, that's probably because the priest has said so many masses that
It's tired.
he's tired.
That's probably true as well.
Yeah. We're supposed to, in our tradition, and actually the same is true in the Latin tradition, we're only supposed to serve one liturgy, Eucharistic liturgy a day. Sometimes you can do more if there is a true pastoral reason, like your church is full and you don't want to build a bigger one. Or you have to use two languages, and you have enough people who speak another language that they really need to have the liturgy in their language. So that would be a legitimate pastoral reason for a second liturgy. So I have served in parishes where, when I first arrived, Hungarian was the first liturgy in the morning on Sunday, and then it was followed by the English liturgy. Some have had Slavonic and then an English liturgy. Some oftentimes will be a Romanian
Yep, they used to.
and then an English liturgy. But that would be, as far as I'm concerned, the only reason to have a second divine liturgy. It's either they don't all fit, or I have to use another language. Typically in our churches we have Vespers or evening prayer on Saturday evening and on the evening of Holy Days, and morning prayer on Sunday morning matins, which, by the way, every parish is supposed to have, including Roman Catholic churches. If you read in the Second Vatican Council, I know that's 50 years ago, and so for most of you, that's like ancient history. But in the Second Vatican Council, in the document on liturgy, which is specifically directed at the Latin Church, the Roman Church, it says, the daily cycle of every parish church, and I'm paraphrasing here, is the celebration of matins and vespers. It actually says vespers and matins. You know, now, I've never been in a Roman Catholic parish church that has ever done that. The priest has to do it, because the priest has to take his office. And so normally that's part of the office for every day, but it's not, morning prayer and evening prayer is not intended for just the priest to do or the deacon. It's supposed to be public and for the whole community. But since a priest can't take a stipend for it, I can, kind of surmise the reason why it's not done. In our case, I'm not required to take the office. I'm not required to do, the breviary as active Roman Catholics would be aware of, or the liturgy of the hours. I'm not required to do that, because our tradition is based upon the fact that most of our priests are married. And so we are encouraged to pray parts of the office. And ideally, every parish would have morning prayer and evening prayer. Okay, but we would not do the little hours. And because, again, if you're a married guy and you have a family And in rural areas in Europe, you would also be farming. You know, so you could feed your family. That would be impossible. So that's a very distinct difference. Now, I mentioned earlier that we celebrate the three mysteries of initiation, or sacraments of initiation, together, regardless of age. And so, baptism, typically by immersion, again, regardless of age. What the West calls confirmation, what we call chrismation, and then First Communion. So, if you're celebrating those mysteries outside the context of the Eucharistic liturgy, the person can be communed from the pre-sanctified gifts out of the tabernacle, or can receive communion at the next liturgy. But ideally, baptism, chrismation, and communion are celebrated within the Sunday liturgy at the parish. But again, some parishes don't live up to that particular ideal. But they're all together. So I've held babes in arms and plunging them in. It's really easy until as long as they're not, young enough that they, most of them, automatically they close their nose and they close their eyes and they close their mouths, because that's what they're like in the womb. And you use warm water. Sometimes they mess in the fun, but that's all right. That's why if you're baptizing a boy, you point to the boy that eats. I usually do it for both. Plunge them in. Adult ideally also would be baptized by immersion. So that's oftentimes a bit more difficult. So like in St. Athanasius, there's no close enough river that I would swim in. So we just have the person stand over the baptismal font, and I pour pitchers of water over their head. But if they really wanted to be baptized by immersion, I'd make them go buy a horse trough and paint it white, and you would use it to baptize them by immersion, because that is the ideal. Then chrismation, we place chrism on the child. Miron, as we would say in Slavonic, but chrism as it is in Greek and also in the Latin Church. And so they go on all of the senses. And the bishop, or metropolitan, or patriarch, is the only one who can consecrate that chrism. So in the Latin Church, the bishop consecrates, the local bishop, in this case Archbishop Tobin, consecrates the oil of the infirm, which is for the anointing of the sick, the oil of the catechumens, which is used to catechumenate, and then the oil of chrism. Okay? In the Byzantine Church, the parish priest, at the time that he uses them, blesses the oil of the catechumens and the oil for the anointing of the sick. But only the bishop, metropolitan, or patriarch consecrates the chrism. So in the case of my church, our metropolitan in Pittsburgh consecrates the chrism for the whole church, usually on Holy Thursday. And then it gets distributed through all the churches, and I have to send for some more because I'm running out. And I don't want to run out. And now, since I take care of a church, I take care of a community not only in Indianapolis, but I also am the administrator of our mission outside of Davenport, Iowa. And I had one initiation there in August, and 3 other women says, well, we're going to have children this winter. And it's like, all right. I will have to come up there again. Because in our church, because all 3 are celebrated together, the deacon can't do it. So the deacon, if there was an emergency, the deacon would do a baptism, emergency baptism. But the deacon is not the normal person in our church to either celebrate a wedding or do baptism. assists the priest at baptism. In fact, if you came to the liturgy and my deacon was there, you would see that he gets to do most of the work, and I get to pray. Because he has to incense the church, and he's the one who leads the petitions of the people. And occasionally he'll even be, I have my deacon preach every other Sunday. And I love that because then I just have to pray. It's wonderful. It really is. I'm not kidding. I mean, it really is a wonderful experience to celebrate the liturgy with a good deacon, and I have an excellent deacon. And so I keep telling him, I says, the worst thing about you becoming a priest is that I'll lose my deacon.
Because he will be assigned somewhere else.
Oh, no, because he won't be able to be a deacon anymore.
But will they
That's, the bishop has to figure that out, because, Father Deacon John owns the house on the other side of the church. So, that's a little problem. So, I've gone on for long enough. You have questions, I hope.
Yes.
Go ahead, Kyle.
Go ahead, you're fine.
I know that the Orthodox Church doesn't have a lot of icons. Do you guys use any icons?
Orthodox Church uses
Do
lots
they?
of icons,
Oh,
and so do we.
who am I thinking?
Okay, if you come into one of our churches, it will look, smell, and taste like any Orthodox church, because it is an Orthodox church, except we're in communion with Rome while they are not. Okay, so your church should look just like an Orthodox church, smell just like an Orthodox church, taste just like an Orthodox church, sound just like an Orthodox church, because that's what we are, but we're in communion with Rome. The other Eastern Catholic churches come from different traditions, and you can have me come talk about those at some other time, because I can also talk about those.
Yes, I read somewhere, and I can't remember if, but the Divine Liturgy originates, or St. Basil the Great and St. John Chrysostom wrote some. So which one is used at your parish?
All of them.
All of them? Okay.
Yes. In the Byzantine Catholic churches and in the Eastern Orthodox churches, there are 4 Eucharistic liturgies. Okay. The ancient one is the Liturgy of St. James. That's the oldest one. And the anaphora from that liturgy is actually very long. And it comes from the tradition of the Church of Jerusalem. It is celebrated very rarely. And although up until the 4th century it was the normal liturgy for any of the Greek-speaking churches, including the church at Rome at that time. But it has fallen by the wayside, and it's used, in the rare instances that it is used, it's used on October 23rd, which in our church is the feast of St. James, the brother of our Lord, and on the Sunday after Christmas, which is also a celebration of the feast of St. James, the brother of our Lord. Okay, in this particular case, also with Joseph, the spouse of the Theotokos, Jude, the brother of our Lord, and Old Testament and New Testament saints. All right, that's St. James. St. Basil the Great liturgy is used on the Sundays of Great Lent, of the Great Fast, and on the Vigil of Christmas, Theophany, which is January the 6th, the Vigil of Easter, Holy Thursday evening, and in some traditions, the Vigil of Pentecost. Then the 4th one is the Liturgy of the Presanctified Gifts, sometimes called the Liturgy of St. Gregory Theologos, which is Gregory, Pope of Rome. Simply, and it's called that simply because he's the one who took it from Constantinople and brought it to the West. And it was used in the West for a period of time as well. But it is Vespers with the distribution of communion that had been consecrated at a previous liturgy. And that's why it's called the Liturgy of the Presanctified Gifts. So those are the 4 principal Eucharistic liturgies that we have. Okay, that Matins and Vespers and all the others are also liturgy, but they're not Eucharistic. Anyone else? If I put you all to sleep, I didn't intend to.
Kind of have a practical question.
Yeah.
Because since leavened bread is the way it is,
Yes.
how does it keep, like how do you distribute it just enough? Or how do you keep it fresh? And
Well, to reserve it, we don't keep it fresh.
oh, okay.
What happens to reserve the Eucharist, typically, always you replace whatever you have in your tabernacle on Holy Thursday. And so like usually during the first 3 days of Holy Week, we have liturgy pre-sanctified gifts on each of those nights typically. And we distribute everything that's in the tabernacle on those 3 nights, so that there's nothing in the tabernacle on Holy Thursday. And then what you do on Holy Thursday is you prepare enough of the Eucharist for the celebration of that liturgy, and enough enough particles to distribute communion to the sick for the rest of the year. And in order to reserve communion for the sick, after it has, at the time, just before communion is distributed to the faithful, the priest will take the spoon, put precious blood on the spoon, and touch each of the particles he intends to reserve with a drop of the precious blood. And then after the liturgy is over, he places those particles of the Eucharist in a special box. It's called a pre-sanctified box. And then traditionally, the stone is heated and slid into a shelf underneath the pre-sanctified box. And that is left so that the pre-sanctified Eucharist can then be dehydrated. And once it is dehydrated, then it can be put in the tabernacle and reserved. I usually stick Jesus in the oven on keep warm for a couple of hours. Because I don't have one of those, I don't have a stone to put in under my pre-sanctified box. So on Holy Thursday night, I take the Eucharist over to the rectory and I put him in the oven for a couple of hours. Can't keep my cats away. Sorry. And then I can reserve the Eucharist without the fear of the Eucharist becoming moldy or anything like that. So, question was over here, I thought, yeah.
Can you give us a real quick summary as to why there is a Roman Catholic Church, Byzantine Catholic Church, and Eastern Orthodox Church?
Yeah, and some of this information is in these various pamphlets, and please feel free to take one. And also, these are our bulletins. This one's from last Sunday, and this is from a month ago or so. But when the apostles spread the good news of Jesus Christ throughout the known world, and even beyond the Roman world, into the empire of Persia, and all the way to India, they adopted liturgically what was closer to the society of the time and of the place. And so although all of the liturgies follow a similar format, basically because Jewish people had gone all over the world, and what we basically did is we took the synagogue service of readings and the temple sacrifice and kind of fused them together, but now our sacrifices on bloody sacrifice in the Last Supper. But how that was done varied from place to place because the cultures varied from place to place. Now what you might find surprising is that the Latin Church celebrated liturgy in Greek until the 4th century. And they celebrated the liturgy very similar to the liturgy at the same time that was used in Constantinople. But in the West, it got changed into Latin and began to change. And the Western Church, because they like to think it's very cut and dry, everything was kind of made more cut and dry than we do in the East. We like mystery, and like I said, we're preparing for heaven, and so we're practicing, and so our liturgy is beautiful. Now I'm not saying the Latin liturgy is not, don't get me wrong. But in our church, our tradition is such that you provide the very best that you possibly can to celebrate the Eucharist. And so the priest will be vested in the most beautiful vestments that he and or the congregation can afford. We use, as far as our Eucharistic vessels are concerned, the most precious vessels that we can afford. So typically, silver or gold, now oftentimes brass that is gold-plated or silver-plated, but the best that we can afford. In some places, like some places in Czechoslovakia, crystal is used. Okay, that's fairly rare, but it's there and it's in the book. So I've even seen the crystal chalice a couple of times. So that's one of the things, and they just develop differently because of the different influences. Byzantine liturgy had a very heavy influence from Jerusalem and Antioch, and that's what was fused together and became the basis of the Byzantine liturgy. Syriac churches based themselves from Antioch, but did some other things, and actually some of their liturgy is very similar to the Jewish practices. The Ethiopian church and the Eritrean church is a remarkable liturgical mixture of the ancient Judaism that had come to Ethiopia some 10 centuries before Christ, and Christianity, which arrived there in the 1st century. So, in Indianapolis, there's an Eritrean Orthodox Church and an Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Both are about a mile from St. Athanasius. And so I was there for their Easter, which is the old calendar Easter. And the service was 4 hours long, and it was just morning prayer. And the procession around the church, the priest was covered with a liturgical umbrella that some young man had to keep spinning the whole time over the priest's head as he carried the tablets, which represents the Torah, the Ark of the Covenant. All right. So it's very different than what I'm used to as a Byzantine Catholic, but it was very beautiful. And if you wanted a taxi cab that night in Indianapolis, there's like only one place to go, two places to go, outside the Ethiopian Orthodox Church or outside the Eritrean Orthodox Church. Because there were like some 400 taxi cabs between the two places. Because they're the ones who have most of the taxi service in Indianapolis. So that's, some of the reasons for the differences. It's just the culture of the various areas and how things developed over 2,000 years.
Okay, so the Byzantine Rite, these words aren't right, I'm sure, but they report all through the Pope, just like the Roman Catholics do. Why is it?
Not in the same way the Roman Catholics do.
Not in the same way.
No. St. Athanasius Parish is in communion with Bishop John Kudrick. Okay? And we know that because he signed the Antimencian, which is the cloth which has relics in it that we use to celebrate the Eucharist. Without it, I can't celebrate the Eucharist. So I'm in communion with Bishop John. Bishop John is in communion with Metropolitan William. Metropolitan William is in communion with Rome. Okay. Now they're also in communion with all the other bishops that are in communion with Rome, but a direct is Bishop John, Metropolitan William, the Romanians, Bishop John Michael, Major Archbishop or Patriarch Lucia in Romania, from him to Rome.
But still being all under the Pope.
All in communion with the Pope.
Why is the Byzantine priest allowed to get married and not the Roman?
Because our custom is to be married. The Roman Catholic custom started in the Roman Catholic disciplinary law in the 11th century, although it goes back earlier than that, was that priests and deacons who were married in the 11th century were to abandon their wives and children and to live celibately. That was decided at the Fourth Lateran Council. And, but it's interesting to note that the pressure for a celibate-only clergy began in the late 3rd and early 4th century in the West, in Spain and in Gaul. So they actually tried to bring that to the First Ecumenical Council at Nicaea and tried to get that to be imposed then. We told them, all the other churches said, absolutely not. So that's why within the Catholic communion, the Roman Catholic Church has a celibate priesthood, and the Eastern churches have primarily a married parish priesthood. Our celibates typically are in monasteries, and of course the bishops are chosen from the celibates. The only exception to that currently is the Eritrean Orthodox Church, the Eritrean Catholic Church, and they're in the process of restoring married priests in their own church as well, though it's harder for them. So, Roman Catholic Church did it for all kinds of different reasons, some spiritual, some quite practical. In the East, the parish priest never had the authority to pass on his parish to his son. All right? Although in Eastern Europe, it was not unusual if the priest's son became a priest that he ultimately would succeed his father. It was not something that the father did, it's something that the bishop would do. In the West, what was happening is that the priest had a benefice, which included the church and property around it, and then he would give that to his son as part of his inheritance, whether the son was a priest or not. And so if he wasn't a priest, then he would go out and hire some other priest who was from a poorer family to come and take care of his church, while he lived off the income. And so that was an abuse, but that was what was happening. And so in the West, they said, done. And that's how they ended it. So there are some spiritual aspects, but the practical aspect is what was the impetus behind it being mandatory. So, again, because we have a married priesthood, some of the requirements that my Roman Catholic colleagues have, particularly in taking the office, the liturgy of the hours, I'm not required to take. Did that answer your question? All right. Any other questions? I'm a college professor, so I like to talk. Don't
Where is your metropolitan bishop located?
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Yep. But I still don't have to like the Steelers. I'm from Cleveland, and I'm a Browns fan. I'll support the Colts unless they're playing the Browns. But right now, I am in mourning for both. So our only hope right now, I guess, is the Bengals. But no, I will never root for the Steelers. I'm sorry if you're a Steelers fan. I would consider that to be an equivalent to apostasy. I'm just kidding for the people on the camera. Any other questions? Yes?
Can you, as a Byzantine Catholic, receive in an Orthodox church without question, or is that not okay?
Yeah, I could. If I went, typical Byzantine Catholic could easily go to an Orthodox church and receive communion if the priest doesn't know. Okay, and since we look and smell, and taste, and act the same way, yeah, it could slide by. But if they were to go and ask the Orthodox priest, 3 out of 4 times the priest will say no. The opposite is not the case. Orthodox Christians and Oriental Orthodox Christians are welcome to receive communion in the Byzantine Catholic Church, as are Roman Catholics, because we're in communion with you. For Oriental Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox. It's a matter of Eucharistic hospitality. But no, if you were to go to a typical Eastern Orthodox priest, simply following what his bishop directs, by the way, would tell you no. So, no, I normally tell a Roman Catholic, unless they're really familiar with what goes on in the Byzantine church and they go to a big church with a lot of people going to communion, don't even try. Anything else? Well, I've enjoyed it. So, like I said, I'm willing to come back and talk about all the other Eastern churches since I spent 95% of the time talking about Byzantine Catholicism. But I hope it didn't bore any of you.
No, thank you
And
for
I welcome you to pick up any of the brochures that I brought. You can see, some of the different vestments that we wear. I brought it, and all kinds of other stuff. And that's not even talking about some of the theological issues. We could talk about that some other time. But thank you so much for your attention.
Alright,
I don't know who's supposed to close this thing.
Allie is supposed to, but I'll take over for just a second.